He never imagined that a routine drive through the city would change the course of his entire life. Yet as Daniel gripped the steering wheel of his dark sedan that rainy afternoon, weaving through the familiar streets of a place he thought he knew better than the back of his hand, destiny was already setting the stage for a revelation that would leave him shaken to his core, for he had always been a man of rigid order and routine, a successful architect whose eyes were always on his blueprints and whose heart rarely strayed from the cold lines of his plans. And on that day, he had left his office a little earlier than usual, the weight of deadlines heavy on his shoulders, his thoughts swirling with figures and meetings, completely unaware that the world outside, those tinted windows of his car, held a story far greater than any he could ever design with pen and paper. And as he slowed at a red light on the corner of Holloway and Ridge Avenue, he noticed what most drivers pretended not to see: a figure crouched by the sidewalk, soaked in the drizzle, extending a trembling hand to passing cars with nothing more than a paper cup and hollow eyes that told stories no words could capture. And though Daniel was the type of man who had always brushed off beggars as part of the city's noise, something about this one tugged at him. Perhaps it was the way the figure's shoulders shook under the weight of a threadbare shawl, or the fragile way her fingers curled around the cup, desperate yet dignified, as if even in her misery she refused to let go of a sliver of pride. And when the light turned green, Daniel should have driven on like the others. But instead, almost against his own nature, he lowered the window, his wallet in hand, prepared to drop a bill into the cup. And that was when the world seemed to stop, his breath catching in his throat as the figure turned her face toward him, the rain dripping down her cheeks like tears. And in that instant Daniel's heart thundered with a recognition, so fierce it nearly shattered him. For the beggar, the forgotten soul on the sidewalk, was not a stranger at all, but the ghost of his past, the woman he had loved and lost a decade ago, the woman whose disappearance had haunted him through sleepless nights and unanswered prayers, the woman he had once sworn to protect, Isabella. And the name burned in his chest like fire as he froze, his hand suspended in midair, unable to let go of the bill, unable to drive away, his mind reeling with disbelief and sorrow. And as her eyes, still carrying that unmistakable amber glow he had memorized long ago, met his with a mixture of recognition and shame, Daniel realized that this was no accident. This was fate dragging him back to a story he thought was long buried. And if you are following this tale, dear listener, let me remind you, sometimes the stories that grip your heart, the hardest, are the ones you least expect. So make sure you stay with us until the end, and don't forget to subscribe, because what unfolds next will leave you breathless. The night that followed was a blur of restless pacing and unanswered questions, for Daniel could not erase the image of Isabella. His rain-soaked face pressed into his memory, like a scar carved deep into his soul, and though he had tried to offer her warmth, pulling his car to the side and insisting she step in, she had recoiled with a trembling defiance, whispering his name with a voice cracked by years of silence, before disappearing into the alleyways as though the shadows themselves had claimed her, leaving him stranded with a storm in his chest. And so he drove home in a daze, his polished apartment suddenly feeling like a prison of glass and steel, haunted by the echo of her eyes, those amber flames now dimmed by hardship. And he thought back to the last time he had seen her 10 years ago, when she had stood on the balcony of their shared loft, her laughter mingling with the city lights, promising him a future they would build together, only to vanish days later without explanation, her absence shredding his heart and leaving him to believe she had abandoned him for another life, another man, or perhaps simply grown tired of the dream they had woven. And now here she was, broken, forgotten, stripped of everything, and yet the spark of who she was had not died. And Daniel knew he could not let the past repeat itself. So the next morning, instead of heading to his office, he returned to that corner of Holloway and Ridge, his eyes scanning every passerby, every shadow, searching desperately for her. And hours slipped by as the city moved in its usual rhythm, horns blaring, feet rushing. Yet she did not appear, until finally near dusk he spotted her again, crouched behind a vendor's cart, a shawl pulled tighter around her thin frame. And this time he approached on foot, his voice trembling as he said her name, Isabella, and she froze, her eyes flickering with fear and something unspoken. Before she muttered, "You shouldn't have found me," her tone both a warning and a plea, and Daniel, who had faced boardrooms filled with ruthless men, felt his knees weaken in front of her, insisting he only wanted to help. But Isabella shook her head violently, clutching her shawl tighter, and with tears forming in her eyes she whispered, "If you help me, you'll be in danger too." And those words struck him like a blade, for suddenly it wasn't just poverty or misfortune that had dragged her to the streets. There was a darkness chasing her, a secret wrapped in silence. And Daniel realized he had stumbled into something far greater than a lost love story. This was a web of danger he had unknowingly reopened. And dear listener, if you feel the tension rising, know that this is only the beginning of the storm. So stay with us and don't forget to subscribe, because the truth that Isabella hides will shake Daniel's life and yours far more than you can imagine.